And today I would like to share with you the secret to money and happiness. Have you ever heard the expression, money can't buy happiness?
Yeah.
So it depends on where you're at. So when you first start getting money, money helps to alleviate pain and suffering, right? Because you were hungry and now you can afford a hot dog. And so things get better, get better, get better. Until your basic needs are met. And then you start to have, and it increases but at a decreasing rate, your happiness based on the amount of money that you're getting. And this is what we refer to as the hedonic treadmill.
Oh, for shame, she's late.
She smiles though, and she knows that is disarming. Okay. So, where was I at? Okay, the hedonic treadmill. Hedonic, from the same root word as hedonism, it's basically about enjoyment. And the idea is this: when you're on the hedonic treadmill, so you achieve the next level of wealth, and just for a moment, you feel better. But then it becomes the new normal. And then,
oh, for shame, she's even later.
Okay, so it becomes a new normal, and then you're like, well, how am I going to be happier? Well, I need more money. I need more money. Now, here's the weird thing. When you get into this range and you start asking people, how much more money would it take to make you happy? Weirdly enough, the answer is almost always 20%. So, someone who was making $80,000 a year, you ask them, they say 20%, now they're up to $96,000 a year. And what do they say next year when you ask them? 20%. Now, here's the trick. Once you figure that out, then you can, once you're aware of this fact, it helps you to think a whole lot more about what you're willing to do to get more money, right? And so I've told you before, I am as high as I want to go in this organization. Why? Because I'm out here in this area where having more money won't give me all that much more happiness. It'll give me a little, but not nearly enough to get there. In fact, when you get out into this range, the only reason left to go after money is from a scorekeeping perspective, right? Scorekeeping. And so then if you just think about yourself in your own situation and what you've got, and are you happy with that, and then you no longer have to think about the whole scorekeeping thing, then you can start thinking about what is it that really makes me happy and during all this time that I would have been chasing after money. I know it sounds really weird to have a finance professor tell you that you shouldn't be out there chasing money. After a point. Questions? Yeah?
Does the chart account for the time value?
Does the chart account for the time value of money? So you're wanting a third dimension coming out this way. Well, there is a time dimension to this, though, but it has to do with this the idea of the money. So when I'm a little boy, or not a little boy, I was a young man. I was talking to my grandfather. He said, you know, when you're an old man, you have money, but you don't need it. And when you're a young man, you don't have money, but you do need it. And I said, well, old man, I think we can help solve each other's problems. And he laughed and said, not until I'm dead. Then he left all the money to my mom, so now, well, it's going to be a long, long time before seeing any of his money. Okay. By the way, don't spend your life waiting for someone to die. Get out and make your own money. Questions? Okay. So, let's talk about capital budgeting. First of all, I have put a bunch of formulas up here on the board. And I don't believe that they are succinctly stated anywhere, either in the book or on the slides. And the reason is because I expect people to pick up on them during the example. However, I do like to go ahead and write them up there, and I tell you that you will need these to be able to solve your capital budgeting problems from Chapter 8. You will also need them for being able to do the exam. So these should definitely be on your note sheet. So remember, we got the three big questions in corporate finance. We've got, for the first question was the capital budgeting decision, and that is what projects should we undertake? What assets should we purchase? And that's what this chapter is all about. So let's talk about how we're going to go about that. First of all, we're going to use real cash flows, not accounting cash flows. Can you pay your rent with net income? No. Can you buy a pizza with accounts receivable? No. What we are interested in is cash. And so we're going to have to do some manipulation to get back to cash from accounting stuff. It goes back to what we talked about in chapter 2. So these accounting numbers, they have things in them like non-cash expenses like depreciation and deferred taxes, and so we have to get rid of that. I've already talked about accounts receivable. That's money we haven't received yet. But accounts payable, which has been subtracted, or those costs are actually are already included in your net income, but we've yet to actually send the cash. And so we've got some fuzziness on both sides of that one. And net income actually treats us both, accounts receivable and accounts payable, as if the money has already changed hands. Now, here's the big one, and I'm going to hammer this home over and over and over again, and that is the only cash flows that we consider for capital budgeting are incremental cash flows. The only ones that we are interested in are incremental cash flows. What's an incremental cash flow? It's one that's only going to be different as a result of taking on the project. It's one that's only going to be different as a result of taking on the project. We call those incremental cash flows. If we have cash flows that will occur regardless of our decision, we do not include them. I'll give you some examples. And then we also, and this one gets a little tricky, cash flows that could happen if we reject the project. We also include them because they could be different as a result of taking on the project. So you always want to ask yourself, will my decision on the project impact this cash flow? And if the answer is yes, then that is an incremental cash flow. Let's talk about some different kinds of things that we see. First of all, we have sunk costs. And a sunk cost is simply money that has already been spent and we cannot get back regardless of the project decision. It's money we've already spent and we can't get it back. So my mom, when I told her I wanted to be a professor, she said, "What about all that time you spent to become a mechanical engineer?" Now, here's the question. Can I be happier and make more money as a professor than I did as a mechanical engineer? Yeah, I'll tell you the answer for me is yes, right? Because I was a bad engineer. Anyway, so back to this story. And I'm a mediocre professor. That's like moving on up, right? Okay, so, but that money that I've already spent on that and that time, those years of my life, I can't get them back regardless of what decision I make. I can't get those back. And so I don't take those into account when I am thinking about my future decisions. Remember that the goal of financial management is to maximize shareholder wealth. We do that by accepting positive NPV projects. Those projects are all about the future. They're not about what happened in the past. Remember, we're looking at incremental stuff. Okay, so oh, by the way, we don't include sunk costs in our analysis. So let's give some examples of sunk costs. The first one that we always talk about in finance is the marketing survey. What is a marketing survey? Who are my marketing people? I know Mr. Warren's marketing. So Mr. Warren, if I came to you, and so let's say I'm a goat farmer, and I have a goat dairy, and I'm wanting to figure out if people would like to drink chocolate goat milk. How would you, marketing genius, figure out whether people like chocolate goat milk?
Probably do a sample, free samples, or
Very good.
our surveys.
Yeah. Now, how much are you going to charge me for that?
Free.
Oh, okay. You're not a very good businessman, Mr. Warren. So the correct answer is $250,000. And then you watch to see if they're shocked. And if they're not, then it meant that you went in too low, right? But you can always back down, but you can never then pump things up. So every marketing survey, strangely enough, throughout the years, all the years that I've been playing around, they've all been $250,000. And the CEO never batted an eye, so there you go. You got your number, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so the marketing survey, but here's the trick. Marketing people have a certain moral flexibility. So if I tell Mr. By the way, let me demonstrate that moral flexibility to you. These are the kind of people who will convince 15-year-old boys that you can get lucky with Axe body spray, right? So that tells you deeply how morally flexible marketing people are. Okay, so if I tell Mr. Warren that if he comes back with a result of kids love chocolate goat milk, that I'll pay him $250,000. And if he comes back with the most likely result, which is kids hate chocolate goat milk, that I'll pay him $0. What answer is Mr. Warren always going to come to me with?
Kids love chocolate.
Kids love chocolate milk. They can't get enough of that crap, right? That will be the answer you get. So if you want the truth out of a marketing person or anybody, you got to pay him regardless of what the outcome of the study is, right? So that means that we're going to be spending this money one way or the other. Now, if the answer is kids hate chocolate goat milk, are we going to be pursuing a project at all? No. Will we be doing an NPV analysis at all? No. But if the answer is kids love chocolate goat milk, then we're going to do an NPV analysis. And a lot of times people are confused and they think we should include the cost of that marketing study in our cash flows. And the answer is no, we should not, because it's a sunk cost. That money is gone. And no matter what decision we make now, it's not going to change the status of that $250,000. So there's our first example of a sunk cost. Now let's talk about the environmental impact study. If you're going to build a gas station in California, you have to hire at least 3 experts. First, you have to hire an anthropologist or archaeologist to come out and make sure that there are no native artifacts on the land where you're going to be building this gas station. And then you have to have a hydrologist come out to make sure that none of the runoff, because you guys have seen gas stations before, right, with that sheen on the water, and then the rain comes and that stuff goes somewhere, right? So the question is, will that runoff be going into any sensitive waterways or wetlands? And we've got to have a hydrologist to answer that question. And then finally, we will have an endangered species specialist come in to tell us whether this is the sole breeding ground for the three-eyed newt or whatever the hell it is, right? And so you've got to have all these people come in here. Now, by the way, these people are professionals. Do you think they are expecting to get paid for their time? Yeah, I'm not going out to the middle of nowhere to check for newts if you're not paying me, right? So each of these, let's assume each one of them is going to charge $10,000 to come out and take a look at your site. We've got $30,000 worth of costs there that if they all say yes, we're going to have to spend that money one way or the other, by the way. But if they all say yes, people will be tempted to say, well, we should include that cost of the environmental survey in the project. And the answer is no, because they could have all came back and said no, right? What if only one of them says no? Yeah, it doesn't matter. We're still host, right? But we've already spent that $30,000. We can't get that money back regardless of what decision we make. Therefore, it is a sunk cost. So my wife and I are at a social gathering one time, and this lady was talking about her efforts to adopt a child. Very noble thing to do, want to adopt a child. But she says that she'd been trying to adopt a child out of Guatemala, but the paperwork was very intense and it was very, very difficult. And someone else says, oh, I got a baby out of China, it was much easier. And so then someone else in the group says, maybe you should try adopting a Chinese baby. And she says, no, we've already spent too much time and effort on Guatemala. We're going to stick with it. My wife and I turn to each other immediately, because this is the kind of nerds we are, and we both say, sunk cost, right? Sunk cost. She'd already figured out that she's probably never going to get to, it's like, let that go. Let that go. If you really want a baby, go the easy route and get, because it's going forward, right? It's about the future, not about the past. Questions? One more example of personal sunk cost. I know this young lady, and she was engaged to this really awful guy. And I'm like, why are you going to marry him? She says, well, I've already invested 3 years in this relationship. I'm like, do you see the sunk cost fallacy there? Okay. She ended up marrying him anyway. Nobody listens to me. Okay, so next let's talk about opportunity cost. So you guys, and me too, we all have opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is the thing that you could have done had you not done this other thing. So for instance, on the afternoons of days when I'm not talking to you folks, I really enjoy taking a nap. It's like you get to be my age, a nap is like gold, right? And so I'm like, nap. And then, but is there stuff that I could have accomplished during that time? Oh yeah, I desperately need to get out with my weed eater because the neighbors are starting to look at me funny, right? But I would rather take a nap. So the opportunity cost is there is that I didn't get to trim my weeds. And the same is true when we take on these projects. When you take on one thing, you forego other opportunities. So let's get back to the marriage example. What's the opportunity cost of marrying someone? Yeah, not marrying someone else. So if you had two close, a first and a runner-up, right? So your opportunity cost is the runner-up. Okay, so just like that, in a project, when we choose to do something, it eliminates other opportunities, and we need to consider those things. So here are our favorite examples. Let's start with an empty building. It's a building that the company already owns. It's fully depreciated. The insurance isn't going to change any as a result of putting a factory inside of it, which is what we're thinking about doing with the building. Now, the question is this. Should we include a cash flow for the building in our project? Yes. Why? Yeah, if we don't put our factory inside that building, we could sell it. So now the next question is, how do I get a value on that building? We've got to have a number to plug in. Where am I going to find out what the building is worth? Oh, okay, so I've got like 5 different answers here. He says put it on the market. If you sign a contract to do that sort of stuff, and yeah, I'm not too hot about that, but you're getting close. You've actually jumped a little beyond. Okay. Say again? Net present value. Okay, so she's talking about, and it's true, that's how we value buildings, but that's, do I know all the ins and outs of real estate? Probably not. A surveyor. Okay, so I think you're actually thinking about an appraiser?
Yeah.
Yeah. So appraisers will look at your property, compare it to other properties nearby, and figure out the value of it. Appraisers cost money. That's the difference. Different than my solution. Anybody here have relatives who work as realtors? No? Okay, so sort of. Oh, okay. Well, that's a pseudo relative. Okay, so let me ask you this question. If someone called your girlfriend up and said, I'm thinking about selling my house, I am interviewing for realtors if I decide to sell my house, are you interested in making a proposal? What does your girlfriend always say?
Yes,
Yes! Why? How does she get paid?
by commission.
By commission. So if she doesn't make sales, she doesn't make any money. If she doesn't have anything to sell, she can't make any sales, bada bada bing, and there we are. Okay, so we're going to start with the house example, and then we'll come back to this building that we've got. Every time that my wife and I sell a house, we're on our 4th house now, every time we sell a house, I always call 3 realtors, always 3, and I say, number 1, I'm thinking of selling my house. Number 2, I'm interviewing realtors. Have I made them any promises? No. And then I say, are you interested in making a proposal? And the answer is always yes. And so then they come to my house, and they're usually wearing too much jewelry, too much perfume, too much makeup, and then they come in and they sit down and they've got a binder this thick. And the first third of it is all about how freaking great they are. Oh, and in 2011 I was $1 million seller, and in 2012 I was a $2 million seller, and oh, here's me with the Boys and Girls Club of Northwest Ohio, blah, 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 right? And I'm like, I'm putting up with this stuff. And then she starts to show me some stuff that I'm interested in. She said, in order to figure out what we should ask for your house, I went out to the MLS system. What does MLS stand for? Multiple listing service. It's where all the realtors list their properties, and you guys can see a little bit of the information there. You can see the asking prices, but you can't see the actual final selling price. Only people who have access to MLS can see that. She's got it, I don't, right? And so she says, I pulled the sales numbers on some houses around yours, and then she talks about how my house is similar to theirs and how it's different from theirs. And then she talks about whatever adjustments we're going to have to make, because she's going to come up with some sort of per square foot number. And she's going to talk about what kind of adjustments we're going to make. And then she's going to throw out, and she's like, and finally, what I think we should list your house for. And then she gives me the number. This is finally what I've been interested in. Now, let's assume that I do this 3 times, and I get 3 different numbers. And by the way, these are old numbers because this is the last time I bought a house. So we've got, one says the house is worth $350,000. One says the house is worth $360,000. And the third one says the house is worth $395,000. Which one of those? Let me ask you this: is there one of those realtors that I should ignore?
Yeah.
Yeah, which one?
The bottom one.
Yeah. Why do you think this realtor is telling me she can get $395,000 from my house?
She wants to know your commission.
Say again.
Commission.
Yeah, so she wants the business, right? And she knows that most people are 1, greedy, and 2, stupid, right? Now, I may be greedy, but I'm not stupid. I know what she's doing. She's going to suck me in with this, and then about 30 days down the road, what's she going to say? Because the house isn't going to sell for that.
We're going to settle for the top number.
Say it again.
We're going to settle for the top number.
Yeah, she's going to say, you know, apparently the market isn't as hot as we thought. Do you hear the we? As we thought. So we're going to need to drop the price on your house. And what are we going to drop it to? Right? So when I'm trying to figure out a value of a building, I'm going to throw this out. I'm not even going to pay attention to that one. And I'm going to do the average of these 2. And that's going to give me the opportunity cost for the building. By the way, you can do the same thing with commercial realtors. Commercial realtors are people who help to sell storefronts and warehouses and factories, and they'll be able to get you these kind of numbers too. And you say, well, wait a minute, I feel a little skeezy using these people this way. First of all, remember, I did not promise that I was going to sell the building. And number 2, I did not promise that even if I did sell the building that I would go with you, right? And so, and then the final thing to keep in mind is, if we decide not to do the project, what might we do with the building?
Sell it.
Sell it. And if we sell it, who are we going to go with? Probably one of those 2 top realtors, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's how we would find the opportunity cost for a building. Now, what about a machine? Every time I used to take a new job at a new factory, of course, one of the first things I'm doing is going around scouting and just looking to see what things look like and if there's anything that might be of use to me. And there's always, always, always an old machine under a tarp in the corner. I'm like, what could be under the tarp, right? So I peek under the tarp, right? Okay, now, 6 months later, we decided to get into some sort of business. And I'm like, ha! We have that broaching machine over in the corner. It would be great for this project. Oh, for shame, he's late. And he's wet. Okay, it's because it's raining. I don't think he's been showering in his clothes. Okay, so I want to explain that for our viewers, right? You know, all three people that watch me on YouTube are seriously going to wonder why I said that, so that's why I had to explain it. Okay, so on with the story. The machine in the corner, we figure out that we can use it in this project. And the machine's fully depreciated. It's all good to go. Do I need to include a cash flow for the machine? Yeah, why? Okay, so it should be included as part of the initial investment, but why?
Sell it.
Yeah, what could we do with the machine if we don't use it? We could sell it. Now, we're going to get a number. We need a number, right? And so when I was doing this kind of business, my machine dealer, I'm not kidding you, his name was Rusty, which I thought was a good name for a used machine dealer. Anyway, if I wanted to know what a machine was worth, I would call Rusty in and say, hey, Rusty, what's this machine worth? What would you pay me for it today? And then he would tell me. And I'd say, okay, I'll get back to you if we decide to sell the machine. Right? So now I've got the number. By the way, is Rusty always willing to come out and take a look at a machine? Absolutely, it's his business, right? Okay, so there's where we're going to get our opportunity cost numbers, is from these real estate agents and machine dealers and so forth. We always include opportunity costs in our analysis because they truly are incremental. Because if we didn't take on the project, we could sell the building, we could sell the machine. Questions? Okay, let's talk about side effects. So you guys have probably seen these commercials on television for pharmaceuticals. And they're like, live a free life with Freelexa or whatever it is. And then, you know, they show pictures of a woman on the beach with a dog and she's been cured of whatever was ailing her. And then they say, side effects may include dry eye, diarrhea, sexual dysfunction, hair loss, toenail fungus. Now, do you think it's important to consider those side effects when making a decision as to whether to take the drug? Yeah. Okay, now those side effects are not the main effect. They are the side effects, but we still need to consider them. And the same thing is true when we're looking at capital budgeting projects. The main effect we know about, but then there are these side effects. We have to think about how is this project going to impact the cash flows of other things that we've got going on. And of course there are two ways that it can impact it. It can impact it positively or it could impact it negatively. So let's talk about positively, and that is called synergy. And synergy is when the sum, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. It's like 2 + 2 = 5. You're getting a little something extra for having put these things together. So that's synergy. So let's talk about some examples of synergy. I'm going to use, I really need to get some new examples, but I'll use examples from Apple. So back in the day, back in the dark ages, before iTunes, which is now what, Apple Music, how did we get our music off the internet? Yeah, we stole it, right? And so lots and lots of people were pirates, myself included. Statute of limitations up, don't call the FBI. But I was young and dumb, right? There was actually a Napster server operating out of one of the dorms at Kent State University when I was an MBA student there. Okay, so Steve Jobs comes around and he comes out with iTunes. And it turns out that a lot of us didn't like being criminals. And so we were willing to pay 99 cents to soothe our consciences, right, when we go out there. But so the problem was, in the beginning, that iTunes was only available on Mac, right? Only on Mac, and that's the only place you could listen to it was on your computer. And so unless you were going to carry a laptop around with you, you really couldn't take your tunes with you on the go. Then they came out with the iPod. And the iPod, you could download your music and you could take it with you. And they did some slick advertising because we know how morally flexible marketing people are. And they told you that, yeah, you're going to look really cool with these white things in your ears and this wire coming down to a box about this size. By the way, the original iPods were really cool. They had like a rotary wheel and it was cool. Anyway, so now the question is this. What impact would the introduction of the iPod have on sales at iTunes? Yeah, it's going to push those sales up because nobody wants to look like a nerd carrying their laptop around to listen to their tunes, but now you can look all cool carrying your iPod around. And so now there's a whole new group of people who are willing to log into iTunes and see what songs are out there. Okay, now that is synergy. Let's talk about the opposite, which would be erosion or cannibalism. How many of you have ever been to the Grand Canyon? How was the Grand Canyon formed? Erosion, right? That's the weathering, the wind, the rain wears the rocks away. By the way, if you haven't been to the Grand Canyon, don't go. It's just a big hole. Right? Really not that impressive. Okay, so erosion is one thing that we'll call this negative side effect. Another is cannibalism. What's cannibalism? Yeah, when you eat your own kind. Usually people jump on the human end of that because, of course, as humans, we're a little worried about that. But there are other animals. She's not worried. Are you a cannibal? Yeah? Oh, my! Okay, keep an eye on her. Okay, so let's use an example that people might actually cover that tasty portion of your neck there. Okay, I'm just messing with you. Okay, so back to the story. Did you guys know that chickens are cannibals? Oh yeah. If one of the chickens in the flock gets a little bit sick or has a little injury, what do the other chickens do? They peck it to death. Oh, you guys didn't know that? Oh, yeah, chickens are cannibals. Now, this is why whenever I'm chowing down on a Chick-fil-A sandwich, I never feel guilty because the chicken is an evil creature with a dark heart. Deserves to be eaten. Okay, now, on with the story. Cannibalism, when something eats one of its own. And so if your new project is actually eating cash flows from your other projects, that's cannibalism. So we use the terms erosion and cannibalism interchangeably. So let's talk about, so you can tell how old my example is here. The introduction of the iPhone 6 Plus. What are we up to now? 16. Damn. Someone needs to update his PowerPoints. Okay, so let's talk about Apple. So the iPod, we've got up to the iPod. Well, now they introduced the iPhone, right? And so, of course, I see the iPhone, and I'm like, whoa, it's a computer you can hold in your hand. And being a big old engineering nerd, I'm like, yeah, I've got to have one of those. But, of course, I don't buy the first one because you never buy the first thing of anything Apple makes, right? Always wait for the second one. So I get the iPhone 3G. That's the second one. And I'm sitting there on the couch and I'm playing with it and I'm so happy. And I figure out that there's actually an iPod built into it. And I'm like, I tell my wife, hey, there's an iPod built into this. Now, what do you think I immediately went out and did?
Sold your iPhone.
I did not have an iPod. Yeah. Yeah, I went out. I'm like, just curiosity. See if all, of course, because I grew up in the 80s. Let's see if they have, and all my favorite songs from the 80s were there. I don't know how much Steve Jobs got from me that day. But I can tell you it's far more than he would have gotten if they hadn't come out with the iPhone, because I was never silly enough to buy the iPod. I mean, that's just a waste of money. But the iPhone, that's a practical tool, right? Okay, long story short. So that's synergy, right? That's adding to the iTunes sale. So that's the story of synergy. But what did the sales of the iPhone cannibalize? Yeah, the sales of the iPod. In fact, if you signed on for a 2-year contract, the iPhone was cheaper than the iPod. And so actually the iPhone started to cannibalize the sales of the iPod. By the way, can you even buy an iPod today?
Not for now, right?
Not a new one, right? Yeah, you're going to have one of those retro sites to find the old iPod. Well, anyway, long story short, basically the introduction of the iPhone killed off the iPod. What about the iPad? You think the iPad cannibalized iPhone sales any? No. Until they introduced the iPhone, the big iPhones, and now that starts to cannibalize on the sales of the iPad mini. Which, by the way, so I bought myself, when the iPad first came out, I wait and I buy the second one. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, you know, who would really enjoy this? My mom. My mom would really enjoy one of these because, you know, Facebook and crap. Anyway, so I'm like, you know, it's $500, but I love my mom. I'm going to get it for her for Christmas. And then that September, they came out with the iPad mini. It's only $350. Can you guess what mom got for Christmas? Yeah! Did it cost them the sale of an iPad? Yeah. So there's some erosion there, but there's also some additional sales because there were people who could not afford a $500 iPad, but they could afford a $350 iPad mini. Now I told myself, oh, you know, with her old hands, just holding the smaller iPad will be beneficial to her. Then a couple years later, she sees my wife's full-size iPad, and she says, "Wow, I wish I had one of those." And you can guess what she got the next Christmas. Okay, so that's erosion and cannibalism. Let's talk about the Apple Watch. By the way, I did not buy the first one of these either. The Apple Watch. Can you tell me any sort of synergy or cannibalism story there? What do you have to have in order to make an Apple Watch work? You got to have an iPhone. And when iPhone or the Apple Watch first came out, there were people from the Android family who thought it was so cool that they actually renounced their Android faith and converted over to Apple, right? So there was a synergy story there. I can't think of a single cannibalism story because no one's going to buy this instead of an iPhone, right? No one's going to buy this instead of an iPad. And so there's all sorts of synergy and cannibalism stories throughout, and Apple's one company, but you can think of others. Now, here's the next question. If a project is going to cannibalize some of our sales, should we avoid undertaking it?
No,
No, why not?
because you might have the added benefit on the other end of the things it doesn't.
Okay, so mathematically, we might come out better. Well, and we will, or we won't accept the project, right? But why might people... Let me ask you this question. If you don't cannibalize your sales, who will? Your competitors. So I was working for this company, and we were making suspensions to go under the trailers that on 18-wheelers. And they were just big boxy contraptions made of angled metal. They were heavy, heavy, heavy. And any amount of weight that you have on the truck, as you haul it down the road, you have to burn diesel to haul it. Plus, it's 1 less pound of cargo you can carry. And that's the whole point of the truck, is to carry cargo. And so our engineers came up with this new, and it was super sexy, this new suspension, and it almost had lines like an airplane. It was light, it was strong. Our old suspensions were going for around $400 a unit. This one was going to be around $2,000 a unit. But we could help the trucking companies to justify it based on the fuel savings, right? But we weren't going to be able to make as big a profit margin on them as we were making on the old ones. If the management had been short-sighted, they would have said, we're not going to do that because we make more money on the old ones. However, there was at least one other company that was our competitor. And if we had not come out with that, then they would have come out with it and taken the market. Now, as soon as we come out with it, what do they have to do?
Catch up.
Yeah, they got to catch up. They've got to come out with something similar, or they'll be in a world of hurt. So it's if you guys have ever done game theory, that's the prisoner's dilemma, where it's compete or cooperate, and we almost always end up competing because someone's going to go for the money. Okay, any questions? Should we include side effects? Absolutely, we should include side effects because they are real cash flows. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Baldwin Company example. And before we do, though, I'm going to go through these formulas that we've put up here on the board. When we're doing an NPV analysis, the cash flows that we are discounting at a rate appropriate to the risk are the cash flows from assets. And if you think back to chapter 2, we've already talked about cash flows from assets. You may also see it written CF parenthesis A. So that's what we're headed for. Now, how do we get there? Well, first of all, the cash flow from assets, if you remember back to chapter 2, is, by the way, what does OCS stand for? Operating cash flow minus NCS. What's NCS? Net capital spending. Very good. And then what is the triangle?
Change.
Yeah, minus the change in NWC. What's NWC? Net working capital. And by the way, net working capital is current assets minus current liabilities. And so all we have to do is find 2 periods worth of NWC and we can find the difference. Operating cash flow is equal to EBIT. What's EBIT? Earnings before interest and taxes. Very good. Minus taxes plus what's DEP? Depreciation. Now, here's the question. Why do we have to add back depreciation?
Because you took it out in EBIT.
Yeah, it's missing out of EBIT. Why is it missing out of here? Because we have to subtract it out before we can calculate our taxes. In finance, the only reason we care about depreciation is because of its impact on our taxes. Accountants think it's a real thing. We don't care one bit about it, except for how it impacts our taxes. And why do we care about that? Are taxes real cash flows? Absolutely, and we are very much concerned about real cash flows. Now, let's talk about the after-tax salvage value of the project. The after-tax salvage value. We start out with the market value, NV market value. That is, how much can I get if I sell this machine on the open market? How much can I get if I sell this machine on the open market? Minus, what do you think T stands for? Tax rate. Times the difference between that market value and what do you think BV is? Book value. Now, here's what's going on. As we depreciate that item, we are avoiding paying taxes. If we under depreciate the asset, then we are due for a refund at the end. So if we under depreciate the asset, then the market value will be less than the book value. This thing will be negative. What's a negative times a negative? That's positive, and you end up getting a tax refund. So your after-tax salvage value is actually more than the amount that you'll be selling this thing for. Someone got a brick in their bag? Okay, so, but more likely what's going to happen is this, that your market value will end up being greater than your book value because you over depreciated the asset, which means you have underpaid your taxes, and as a result you have to send some money to the government. Now, when you're looking at your own taxes, because there are these penalties, I just want to owe them a slight amount of money. This year I got hit with a penalty because I hadn't withheld enough, and so there was a penalty. What you need to understand, though, is there is no penalty for these taxes that you have to pay at the end. Knowing that there's no penalty and there's no interest involved, when would you rather pay those taxes? In year 1 or year 5? Yeah, year 5. Time value of money, right? Because it's the same $100 in taxes. I would much rather pay it 5 years from now. Does that make sense? And so what that means is I want to depreciate these assets down to zero as quickly as the government will let me. And we'll get into the whole government letting you do things with depreciation here in a bit. But that is the idea. So ideally, we would have this depreciated down to zero before we sell it. In fact, 1997, when I take over my operation in Dallas, Texas, all of my machines were produced in 1979 or before. So they had all been completely depreciated. Every single one of them had a zero book value. However, the lowest market value any of my machines had was $50,000, and my top machine was worth about $300,000. And so if I sold them, certainly there's no book value to them, but I would not be able to keep all that money because after all, apparently I had over depreciated those and I would owe some money to the government. Now, this after-tax salvage value, we're going to invest money up front, and we're going to call that net capital spending. So money out is positive. When we put this into our problem, what does that mean? The sign needs to be on after-tax salvage value. Whatever we put in there's going to be negative because it's cash coming back toward us. So we're going to put negative ATSV as our final net capital spending. Now, I've put book value up here, and we've talked previously a little bit about how to figure book value. It's historical cost minus the accumulated depreciation. So the book value at time t is the historical cost minus the accumulation depreciation at time t. What is historical cost? Yeah, what you bought it for, right? So if I bought this thing for $100,000, and it doesn't matter whether it was in 1912 or 1982, that historical cost is $100,000. Now, what is accumulated depreciation?
The amount you've already depreciated.
Say again?
The amount you've already depreciated.
Yeah, the amount. So at the end of year one, I'm going to do a certain amount of depreciation, and at that time, accumulated depreciation will also be equal to that amount. At the end of year two, I'm going to depreciate some more, and I will add that amount onto my accumulated depreciation. So every year, that accumulated depreciation gets bigger as long as I'm still depreciating the asset, as long as I haven't hit zero yet. So I'm just going to take the historic cost minus all the depreciation charges I've taken against that asset so far, and that's going to give me book value. For the purposes of doing a spreadsheet, which is what we're heading to, for the purposes of doing a spreadsheet, here's how I would rather do it. I would rather say that the book value at time t is equal to the book value at time t minus 1 minus the current depreciation. Minus the current depreciation. It's going to save us, if I go with this way instead of this way, it's going to save us from having one line in our spreadsheet because we're not going to have to actually calculate accumulated depreciation. Any questions so far? Okay, now one of the assumptions that we make is that net working capital is going to go to zero at the end of the project. By the way, when I'm starting at anything new, I always have to have cash for one, right? So I'm always going to have a jump in my net working capital when I start a new project. So I'm going to have extra cash. I'm going to have some raw materials. So that's current. Those are both current assets. And then I'm going to be buying those materials on credit. My accounts payable, which is a current liability, is also going to be going up. But hopefully, my accounts payable is not going up as fast as my accounts receivable. Why would we hope that to be the case?
So you have enough to pay off the...
Yeah, well, let's think about it this way. If I'm buying and selling apples, if I'm buying apples for 10 cents a piece, and I'm selling them for 20 cents a piece, then assuming the terms are the same, my accounts receivable should be twice my accounts payable, right? If I'm buying apples for a quarter and selling them for a dime, my accounts receivable is going to be less than my accounts payable. It means I'm a pretty rotten business person, right? Not really good at doing this thing. So we would say overwhelmingly, you will see accounts payable being smaller than accounts receivable as long as the terms are the same. Do you guys know what I mean by terms? 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, that sort of thing. Okay, now, here's the assumption. At the end of the project, that net working capital drops to zero. So where does the money come from to begin with? It comes from the mothership, this otherwise profitable firm. That's where we get the money. And so that is an investment cash flow. That's why we say subtract the change in net working capital, because if net working capital goes up, that's additional money we've had to invest. Now, as we go through this thing, one of two things is going to happen. Either that net working capital is going to change every period based on the sales, and it makes sense that net working capital would be a percentage of the sales, or more likely for what I'll throw at you for homework in the majority of your exams questions would be where the net working capital goes up at the beginning and then just goes down at the end. Now, why would it go down at the end? We take the remaining raw material, we throw it in the machine, and then we produce finished goods. So we've taken raw material inventory, turn it into finished goods inventory. What are we going to do with the finished goods? Yeah, we're going to sell it, but we won't get cash, we'll get what? Accounts receivable. And then we'll collect the accounts receivable, we'll finally get our cash, then we'll pay off our accounts payable. Does that make sense? And now, all we have at the end of the project is a bunch of cash. We've got no inventory, we've got no receivables, we've paid off our payables, and so we've got this big hoard of cash. Do you think the mothership is going to let us just throw a big party with that money? No, the money goes back to the mothership. And that's why the cash flow at the end, this change in net working capital, because it goes down, it's going to have a negative sign. A negative times a negative is a plus. That's going to boost your cash flow. Does that make sense? Okay, now, the other assumption that we have up here is that we get all of our opportunity costs back at the end of the project. So remember we said that if we're going to use this warehouse, that we need to have a number to represent that warehouse in case we sell it. That's going to be part of our investment up front, part of our net capital spending. But at the end, we assume we can get that money back. Now, that means that we're going to have identically the same number at the end as we did at the beginning. Now, there are students that will say, you can't possibly know what the building is going to be worth in 5 years. And they're absolutely right. And so prior to the financial crisis, the argument among students was that real estate values always go up. And so we should somehow try to figure out how much greater this building is going to be worth at the end. And I told them, no, real estate values don't always go up. And they were shocked. And then we had the financial crisis. And then I would make this speech and people would say, but wait a minute, real estate prices always go down. And I'm like, no, they don't always go down. We actually lived through quite a lot of time when they didn't. The trick here is we don't know what's going to happen. So we do the very best that we can, and we just assume that we get that money back at the end. Is it worth as much? No, because of the time value of money. It's not worth as much, but that's the assumption that we make. Any questions? Okay, now since we have already gotten to this part, I will go ahead and read to you. Remember in grade school when the teacher would read to you? So I'm going to read to you from the example, and I'll bring one copy for you next time. The Baldwin Company, originally established in 1965 to make footballs, is now a leader of all sorts of balls. And, oh yeah, so they have decided that they're interested in the market for brightly colored bowling balls. What color are bowling balls usually? Okay, so you guys are younger than I am. When I was in grade school and of age to learn to bowl. By the way, if you don't know what bowling is, look it up. If you were of the age, if you're older, you think of bowling balls as mostly being black, And then occasionally there would be a sexy red marbled one, and I would always pick that one regardless of how freaking heavy it was because it was so sexy. Now, this thing, in those terms, now you see that there might be this market. At a certain point in time, there was a market for these brightly colored bowling balls. Okay, now they've sent the marketing people off to figure out the potential for brightly colored bowling balls. Where would you go to do market research on the demand for brightly colored bowling balls? The bowling alley. Now, would you wear your coat and tie? No, you're going to wear one of those undershirts that the wife beater, you guys know what that is? Yeah, you're going to wear one of those. You're going to have a cigarette and a long neck. Do they allow you to smoke? They don't even allow you to smoke in bowling alleys anymore. What is happening to this country? Yeah. Okay. So, but you know, you're gonna go blend in with the crowd, and you're going to then you're gonna have your product with you. How are you going to figure out this demand? You're gonna show them your balls. I heard 3 people snort at that one, and to those people I say, get your mind out of the gutter. Oh, second bad bowling joke of the day. Yeah, always a classic. Okay, so, yeah. Now, it turns out that this whole marketing study cost $250,000. I assume a lot of that went to long necks and Marlboros, but you know, and you also got to pay to bowl, right? Okay. Are we going to consider that as one of our costs? No, why not? It's a sunk cost. So I did an essay exam at one point. I don't do this anymore. But a student referred to this as a suck cost. Like, no, it's not a suck cost. It's a sunk cost. Okay. Now, they think they can achieve a 10 to 15% share of the market. Let's talk about the kinds of information you get from a market study. You get the price point at different volumes. So if I'm only going to sell 300 of them, I can charge more. But if I go out there and sell more of them than that, I can reach more people, but I have to charge less, right? And so that's part of what the marketing study is all about, is figuring out what people are willing to spend at these different quantities. For example, the Toyota Supra. Do you guys know what a Toyota Supra is? They are coming to the end of this production run of the current Supra, and they're making this super fancy one. And it's really not all that different. It's got a few more horsepower, it's got some different like little gimmicks and stuff, but it's really not that much different. But they're charging twice as much for it. Do you know how they're getting by with it? Yeah, they're only making 300 of them. If you want to be one of the cool kids, you've got to pony up, right? Okay, so we see this in the real world. Okay, now let's see what else. Oh, so we see the prices, we see quantities. Now, I want to tell you about the nature of marketing people. Not only are they morally flexible, they also tend to be optimists. Raise your hand if you're a marketing person. Now keep your hand up if you're an optimist. Yeah. Okay, raise your hand if you're an accountant or finance person. Now keep your hand up if you're a pessimist. You see it? Okay. Now, and I know we say pessimist. I call it realist, right? Okay. So let's talk about what that means. I had this guy, Bob, and Bob would come up with these would do a marketing survey, and every single time Bob's numbers were 20% too high. Now you might think that that would irritate me, but after a while, what do I figure out? He's always 20% too high. So when Bob says it's going to be 480,000 units, I say, thanks, Bob, and I turn around and I put 400,000 units into my spreadsheet because he's always 20% too high. You see that 20%? Yeah. You see how that works? So, accountants. What do you think? And we just discussed accountants being pessimists, right? When accountants are helping you estimate costs, what are they always going to do? Yeah, they're always going to go higher because reality is that prices will cost will probably be higher than we thought, but it's also just the very nature of them. And engineers, when engineers give us numbers, they're going to put in safety margins because that's how we're trained. And so if you're asking an engineer how much something's going to cost, they'll tell you, they'll come up with a number in their head, 8,000, and then they'll turn around and tell you 10,000 for two reasons. Number one, they realize there's going to be that crap that happens, like the concrete only being 4 inches thick. And the other thing is, a lot of times, they can actually get kind of credit for coming in under on the backside. So for example, when we were selling subsurface safety valves at Halliburton, and my planner, Bill, would tell the salespeople how much that it was going to cost us to make it. Well, it was going to cost us $90,000, and he would turn around and tell the salespeople it's going to cost us $100,000. The salespeople really didn't care because they were going to turn around and throw a markup on it anyway, and salespeople get paid how? Commissions. But here's what you need to know. When we came in under $100,000, we got credit for the difference between the $100,000 stated cost and what we actually produced it for. So we would get credit. Over my time in that job, which is like 2 years, we pulled in an extra $2.72 million with that stuff. And do you think that we got patted on the back for that? Oh yeah, they gave me some stock, right? I've still got 7 shares. Yeah, it wasn't enough to keep me around. Okay, anyway, long story short, different kinds of professionals have different biases, and when we get those numbers from them, we need to take those biases into account. If the accountant says it's going to cost $10, it's probably only going to cost $9.50. If the engineer says it's going to cost $100,000, it's probably only going to cost $90,000. And there's all sorts of this kind of stuff. And by the way, if the marketing people tell me I'm going to be able to get $12 for it, how much do you think I'll be able to sell it for? 10. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see what else we've got here. We won't go any further into the example because I want to work through it with you guys, but I'm going to ask you this. Do you think when we are doing a capital budgeting analysis that we would ever include dividends? No, why not? Oh. Let me ask you a deeper question. How are we accounting for the cost of financing in a net present value analysis? Is it through cash flows? Ms. Sego, how are we accounting for the cost of financing in a net present value project? You're breaking my heart. What's that?
Equity and debt.
Okay, you're getting closer. So we're looking at our initial investment amount and we're looking at the future cash flows, but there's another ingredient that we have to throw in that pot. What is it? Say again? Say one more time. Oh, no. The discount rate. Will you hand this up to him, please? Thank you. The discount rate, remember? We said that's the rate that's required from the market based on the risk. That's how we cover our costs of financing in these projects. Therefore, should we ever include a cash flow for dividends? No. Should we ever include a cash flow for interest? No. Because we did weighted average cost of capital, right? We've already included that cost. By the way, accountants and recovering accountants are the ones that are most likely to think we need to include interest as a cash flow. And the reason is because when you're looking at the operating cash flows at the firm, they consider interest to be an operating cash flow, when in truth, it's a cost of financing. Okay. Let's see. I think that's about all the farther I want to go today. Are there any questions? Next time, I will bring copies of the project, or the example, and then we will work through building a spreadsheet. See you next time.